I woke up blind. That's what the doctor said. That's what my husband Garrett believed. That's what I told everyone. But here's what actually happened. I woke up seeing. Not the way you see. The way a predator sees. Clear. Strategic. Awake. My name is Nora Rhodes. I'm 41 years old. And this is the story of 3 years I spent watching my husband build an empire on lies. The empire wasn't his. And I didn't just watch. I orchestrated the entire collapse. This is what happens when you assume the invisible woman can't see you. The woman who disappeared. Before the accident, I was good at disappearing. Nora Rhodes, wife of Garrett, employee at Rothschild and Associates, member of various committees that met in rooms where nobody remembered I'd been present. I was the kind of woman who could sit through a meeting and say nothing, and afterward, men would ask my husband, "Wasn't there someone else here?" I'd train myself into invisibility. Not shyness. Strategy. I'd watched my mother, brilliant, ambitious, loud, get destroyed for taking up space. I'd watched my sister get labeled difficult for asking questions. I'd learned the arithmetic of survival. The smaller you are, the longer you last. So, I became small. I married Garrett at 38 because he was the kind of man who wanted a wife who wouldn't challenge him. He was a venture capitalist. Obscenely wealthy. The kind of man who'd made his first fortune at 32 selling some technology one didn't understand to people who did. He married me because I was pretty in a way that didn't threaten him. Because I wore beige and said, "That's interesting" at the right moments. Because I'd perfected the art of agreeing without actually listening. We'd been married 12 years. I can't remember the last time he looked at me and really saw me. That was the point. The woman she was. But there was someone Garrett couldn't forget. Her name was Eleanor. I found the first photograph 3 years into our marriage. It fell out of an old box when the movers came. Eleanor had blonde hair and the kind of smile that took up space. She was standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, wearing a wedding dress that looked expensive and real. I asked Garrett about her. "My first wife," he said, like she was a subscription he'd canceled. "She died in a car accident before we met." I didn't ask more questions. That was part of my strategy, too. The less I asked, the less I had to process, the easier it was to stay small. But Eleanor stayed in the house. Not physically, but in the spaces between things. In the photographs Garrett kept in a drawer I wasn't supposed to see. In the way he sometimes called me Eleanor when he was half asleep. In the will that left most of his assets to her family in case something happened to Eleanor. She was 14 years dead, and she was still the most important woman in his life. I never questioned why. The accident. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March. Garrett was driving. We were heading to a gala, some venture capital thing, where I'd stand next to him and let men talk over my head. It was the marriage I'd chosen. The visibility I'd surrendered for safety. The truck ran the red light. I remember the sound first, the metal screaming. Then the impact. Then Garrett's hand, reaching for me, and I thought, at least he's reaching. At least he still remembers I'm here. I hit my head. The windshield shattered. The world went dark. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctors said I was blind and deaf. Trauma to the optic and auditory nerves, they explained to Garrett while I lay in the bed trying to understand if I was dying or being reborn. Rare complication. Permanent. Tragic. Garrett held my hand and cried. But I could see him. The tears weren't real. They were produced on schedule, like a performance he'd done before. His hand held mine with exactly the right pressure to seem devoted. And his eyes, when he thought I couldn't see them, looked almost relieved. I'd disappeared. And for the first time in 12 years, my husband seemed grateful. The ghost in the room. 3 weeks after I came home, a woman moved into the guest house. She introduced herself to the empty room where she assumed I was blind, deaf, gone. "Hi, Eleanor. I'm Vera." My hands started shaking. "I'm Garrett's new business partner," she continued, looking at me with a kind of disinterest that suggested I was furniture. "We're building something incredible." Vera was 42, tall in a way that suggested she'd always taken up space. Sharp cheekbones. eyes that calculated everything they saw. She wore black like other women wore armor. She barely acknowledged my existence, which meant I could watch her without being watched. What blindness revealed! I began to understand my husband through his lies. The venture was called Ashford Capital Ventures. It was supposed to be a hedge fund that would revolutionize something about investment strategy. Garrett explained it to me in slow, careful language, as if blindness had affected my intelligence. I let him believe it, but I could see Vera and Garrett through the frosted glass of his office door. I could see her hand on his shoulder. The way he leaned back in his chair like she'd already won something. The way they moved together like people who'd been rehearsing. They weren't business partners. They were lovers. But it went deeper than infidelity. One night, I heard Garrett on the phone. His voice was different, not the careful voice he used with me, but something raw, frightened. I understand the money is important, he said. But she doesn't deserve to suffer for something she didn't do. A pause.
No.
I won't do it again. I can't. Eleanor was.
He stopped.
The line went dead. I lay in my wheelchair, blind to the world, and realized my husband had killed his first wife. The woman in the files. I started to move around the house differently. Not like someone who was blind. Like someone who was pretending to be blind while actually learning the layout perfectly. I found the office unlocked one morning. Vera and Garrett were in the guest house. I had 40 minutes. Inside a filing cabinet, I found Eleanor. Not Eleanor herself, but the evidence of her. There was a newspaper clipping from 14 years ago. Local woman dies in car accident. Eleanor Rhodes, 35, venture capitalist, died when her vehicle collided with a telephone pole at high speed. No witnesses. No other vehicles involved. But there was more. A letter from Eleanor to her attorney, dated 3 days before her death. It detailed financial irregularities in a venture Garrett was running. Shell companies. Money moving through accounts that didn't exist. Eleanor had discovered the fraud. She was going to report it. 3 days later, she was dead. And the investigation was closed. I sat on Garrett's office floor and understood something that made my entire body cold. My husband didn't just kill Eleanor. He'd gotten away with it.
Completely.
12 years later, nobody was looking. Nobody was asking. Eleanor was just a dead wife, a tragedy to be moved past. Until he decided to do it again. Part 7. The plan? I began to piece together the venture. Vera would come to the house and leave documents on Garrett's desk, believing I couldn't see them. I could see the shapes. I could touch the pages and feel the raised ink. Over 3 months, I began to understand. The venture was designed to take money from investors and funnel it through shell companies. The returns would be fake at first, built on money from later investors. It was a pyramid. It was always going to collapse. But by the time it did, Vera and Garrett would already own everything. This was the same venture that had killed Eleanor. And I understood why when I found the will. Garrett had rewritten it. If something happened to him, his entire estate, over $60 million, would go to Vera. Not his family. Not even to Eleanor's family, like the old will had stated. To Vera. I found her plan written in notes she'd left behind. She was going to poison him. Slowly. Just enough to make him seem unstable. Enough that when he died it would look like natural causes. A man under financial stress, making bad decisions, pushing himself too hard. And then she'd inherit everything. She was doing to Garrett what Garrett had done to Eleanor. And I had a choice to make. I could go to the police. I could tell them about Eleanor. About the fraud. About Vera's plan. I could be the good woman who survived and protected others. But I would have to explain how I knew. I would have to admit that I'd been watching. That I'd been documenting. That I'd been using my supposed disability as a shield while I gathered evidence. That I'd let my husband commit crimes while I sat in my wheelchair and took notes. I would have to become the villain of my own story. So, I made a different choice. I decided to let them destroy each other. But I would orchestrate it. Part 9. The woman who watched. For 3 years, I became the most attentive wife. I positioned myself in rooms where conversations happened. I left my wheelchair door open so my muffled hearing could catch plans. I moved around the house in ways that suggested I was getting stronger, more mobile, but still fundamentally disabled. I documented everything. Not formally. In a small notebook hidden in my wheelchair cushion.
Dates. Times.
Fragments of conversations. The formula Vera was using to poison Garrett. She was careless. She left the bottle in the guest house bathroom. I made copies of Vera's notes. I photographed the fake investment documents. I created a record of every conversation I overheard where Vera discussed the plan. And I waited for the right moment. It came in month 34. Vera had decided Garrett was weak enough. The poisoning had been working for months. He was tired, paranoid, making mistakes. He'd started asking questions about the venture, suggesting they slow down. He was becoming a liability. Vera bought a new bottle of poison. This one was stronger. She was planning to finish it. I made an anonymous call to the FBI. Not with my documentation. That would implicate me too deeply. Instead, I reported a financial crime. An investment scheme that was defrauding investors. A venture called Ashford Capital that was moving money through shell companies. I gave them enough detail to be credible. Not enough to trace back to me. The FBI started investigating. Then I made a second call. To an anonymous tip line. About a woman named Vera purchasing large quantities of a controlled substance. I gave them the date she bought the poison. The pharmacy. The fake name she'd used. The local police started investigating. Within a week, the walls were closing in. Vera realized it was happening. I watched her from my wheelchair as she moved around the house with new urgency. She started packing. She was going to run. But I'd made sure there was nowhere to run. I'd also sent copies of her handwritten notes about poisoning Garrett to an anonymous email address, an address that I knew would forward them to the FBI's fraud department. I'd been 3 steps ahead of her the entire time.
She just didn't know I could see.
Part 11, the breaking. The FBI came for the office first. They had a warrant. They seized computers. They took files. They left with boxes and questions. Vera panicked. That's when I knew she would break. Panic makes people honest. Panic makes people confess. She went to Garrett. I could hear the muffled conversation through the walls. The FBI is investigating. They know about the shell companies. They know about the investors. They know everything. Garrett looked at her like he'd never seen her before.
How?
Who told them? I don't know. But we need to leave.
Now.
That's when Garrett understood. He finally understood what Eleanor had understood 14 years ago. That Vera wasn't his partner. That she was using him. That the venture had never been real. And more terrifying, he understood that someone had orchestrated this. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in 3 years. I was sitting in my wheelchair, blind to the world, and he could see in my face that I'd been watching him the entire time. The confession. Vera ran. She made it as far as the state border before state police stopped her. They found the bottle of poison in her car. They found her notes. They found evidence of her purchase. She confessed to everything. Not because she was broken. Because she was terrified. She explained the plan to poison Garrett slowly. She explained the inheritance. She explained why Garrett had been so perfect for her. And then she made a mistake. She mentioned Eleanor. He did the same thing to his first wife. Vera told the detectives. Eleanor found out about the fraud. She was going to report him. And he killed her. He killed her and got away with it. I know because he told me. That's how I knew I could do the same thing. That's how I knew he'd never figured out. The detectives listened, and for the first time in 14 years, Eleanor's death became a real investigation. Part 15, the confession. Eleanor's mother called me after Vera's conviction. She wanted to know how I'd figured it out. How her daughter's death had finally been avenged. I told her a version of the truth. I was watching, I said. While everyone thought I was gone, I saw what was happening. And I made sure the right people knew.
She wept.
You saved Eleanor's memory, she said. I saw her, I replied. When everyone else was looking away, I finally saw her. I didn't tell her that I'd orchestrated everything. That I'd made anonymous calls to federal agencies. that I'd manipulated Vera into confessing, that I'd used my disability as a weapon. I didn't tell her that I was as morally compromised as the people I'd helped destroy. That's the thing about orchestrating someone's downfall from the shadows. You get to choose what story people believe about you. The question I can't answer. People ask me now if I did the right thing. They ask if I should have gone to the police immediately instead of waiting 3 years. If I should have warned Garrett that Vera was poisoning him. If I should have prevented Eleanor's death by coming forward about Garrett's first crime. I don't have a good answer. What I know is this: I watched my husband commit fraud. I listened to him plan a woman's death. I documented his crimes while sitting in a wheelchair, pretending to be gone from the world. And when I finally acted, it wasn't out of morality. It was out of strategy. I wanted Vera to suffer. I wanted Garrett to fall. I wanted to be the woman who'd orchestrated their destruction while appearing to be the helpless wife nobody watched. I wanted to win. And I did. But winning when you've orchestrated someone's downfall from the shadows doesn't make you good. It makes you powerful. And I'm not sure that's the same thing. Final confession. My name is Nora Rhodes. For 3 years, I was blind and deaf to the world. But I saw everything. I watched my husband build a business on fraud. I listened to his lover plan his death. I documented their crimes with the precision of someone who had nothing else to do but pay attention. And when the moment came, I orchestrated their collapse by doing almost nothing but seeing. If you're in a marriage with someone whose eyes don't match his words, if you're disappearing to keep the peace, if you're learning to take up less space so he doesn't feel threatened,
Know this.
invisibility is power.